Today we're going to have some fun making a crazy coil bowl using a slump mold. We're just going to be sort of freeform with it, but I have my mold here. This is a bamboo fiber bowl. I can't get it too wet, so I have made a moisture barrier here from a piece of a plastic bag. I have new clay here. It's important that we use new clay for this project, and I'll show you why in just a moment. I have some slip, which I won't use a whole lot of at this point, and I'm just going to start modeling and making some coils. Now you will see that as normal, I have sped up the video quite a bit. Nobody works at this speed, not even me. And I'm going to make a long, skinny coil, and then I'm going to roll it up and coil the coil. And I'm not going to do what I normally would do, and that is score and slip it together. That's because this is all new clay, and I want to keep it new when I do that. I'm going to put a little bit of slip on it to make sure that it's wet, and then I'm going to use a stick instead of my finger because it's firmer, and I'm going to go over the entire back and I'm going to blend the coil together. Because this is new clay, it should work just fine if I blend one side, and blending it that way will also make it waterproof later on if I can plug all of the holes. It's important that I'm using new clay here. That way I know that all of the clay has the same moisture in it and will dry at approximately the same rate. If I have older clay or clay that I have put together and it's not well wedged enough, the difference in drying rates will cause the joints that I put together to crack. And I wouldn't want that in something that I want to be watertight. Handmade coils like this are particularly susceptible to different drying rates because not all of them are exactly the same size, and the different thicknesses and different sizes will cause it to dry at a different rate as well, as some of the clay is thicker and some is thinner. What will not necessarily be evident from this video is that I did end up with some cracking very lightly between the different coiled coils that I had put together. To fix micro cracks like I had, I put really gooey slip in the cracks until they stopped cracking. I couldn't put too much moisture back in the clay, but I could put a little bit of slip in it over and over again. I'm going to take these coils now and I'm going to put them in the bottom of the bowl and I'm going to put them in place. They're going to be once again blended into place because there's still that new clay. Notice when I put them in, the coiled side is down so that the coils are still on the outside or the bottom of the bowl, but not going to be showing on the inside, which will be smooth. Now, as a building method, traditional coils would all be horizontal, around and around, and you might smooth them on the inside and the outside as you went. In this case, I'm going to use them as a decorative element on the outside, and I think they're going to look a lot like swirling air or water. So I'm considering colors like blues and whites when I actually glaze this later. You'll see that I'm blending now with a stick, and it's important that I'm using the stick because my fingers might smush things too much, or they actually might be more malleable than I wanted them to be. I'm going to try to fill all the holes, and to do that I might have to take a little bit of new clay and stick it in the triangles in between the empty places. So I'm going to just take little tiny bits, put some slip on it, and put them in there. Don't want to use too much slip because that will add a lot of moisture to one side of the clay, and I might get, once again, uneven drying. Now I'm going to speed this process up even more on the screen because I'm doing the same thing over and over again. I'm making long rolled coils and then I'm rolling them into sort of snail shells, and I'm using them in what we would normally call modular units. They're all pretty much the same, and I'm using them as building blocks to put things together. A normal coil build would be around and around horizontally, and you would smooth the inside and maybe even the outside to make sure that it is structurally sound. In this case, we are using these coils decoratively, but we are also using them as building blocks, and we're using the mold to hold everything together until it becomes leather hard and I can pull it out and actually work with it. You may notice that I'm making some of the coils a little bit larger and some a little bit smaller to try to fit them in the spaces in between each other. And when I get to the top of this build, I'm going to start putting some little round balls into the design as well. I want it to look sort of foamy or airy at the top, and to do that I thought the round ball design could be continued after I pull it out by scoring and slipping more in place around the top edge. Right now I'm just going to do it to sort of even things out a bit. It's important to note that even though I started with new clay, it does take a while for me to put this together, and the longer it takes, the less new that clay becomes. So I'm going to do this as quickly as possible, and then I'm going to let it get almost leather hard, not quite, before I pull it out of this mold. Once I give it any time to dry, I need to make sure that I'm going to score and slip it at that point. At this point, I'm going to control the drying rate by putting some plastic over it to try to let it dry slowly. The slower it dries, the less opportunity it has to crack. At this point, I can open it up, and it has enough strength to hold itself together. It's not quite leather hard, but it's really close, and you will see that it has taken the form of the inside of the bowl. I can use a tool then, and I can smooth out the parts that I couldn't quite get to, and I can use a little bit of slip and put things together. I'm going to smooth out a lot of this, and I'm going to see if I can't get it nice and neat before I actually put a coil foot on this bowl. You may note that I'm not putting water directly on this. I'm putting pretty gooey slip. It's not the really thick stuff, but I don't want pure water on it. I want to be able to smooth stuff out and still put some silt back into the grog on the outside of this. If I just use water, it would pull the silt off. Now you can see me forming and sizing the coil foot that I'm going to put on the bottom of this so that it has something nice and sturdy to sit on. A coil foot may not be necessary for this, but it's going to give me some decoration space and separate the coils of the pot itself, which are very decorative, from whatever it sits on. And I'm going to put more decoration in that area. You'll see that I'm going to score and slip this together. The clay is no longer new, especially on the bowl, and this clay that I'm using is part of the original clay that I was using to make the bowl the day before. And because it has been drying at about the same rate, maybe a little bit slower, it's well within the parameters of being close to the same amount of moisture that's in the bowl. Once again, those moisture levels are really just important for the shrinkage rates. Now it's going to be important that I size this coil and try not to overscore too much, because my scoring is going to obliterate some of the coils that I want to keep. So overscoring it would mean that I had a lot more cleanup. But if I just score it in the area that I want it to stick, slip will fill in most of the extra, maybe a little bit of overscoring. And I can underscore it a bit because my coil here is pretty thick, and I really just need that scoring to be underneath the coil itself. I don't need it to be any extra around the outside. You'll see that I'm using fingers and tools to clean everything up and try to get it nice and centered on the bottom. You'll notice that the center of the coil that I used for the bottom may not be in the center necessarily of the bowl, because the coil goes out round and round and is always a little wider on one side than the other if the coil was uniform in size to begin with. Now you're going to see me playing a little bit with the design. I'm going to take little balls and I'm going to put them on the top, sort of like they're foam on top of the waves, is my idea here. These little balls of clay may look neat and easy, but remember that each and every one of them needs to be scored and slipped to the pieces around it for them to stick together and remain that way. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. You can see the design completed. This still needs a little bit of cleaning, getting rid of some of the marks from the slump mold, but you can see the balls on the top, and then I'm going to put some balls on the bottom as well to make it look like there's foam that it's sitting on. And then I'm going to use a white glaze. This is a matte white with some watercolor blue, which is basically a lot of cobalt that is making it drip down.